is MEELive's Deep Dive, where we dive into a story shaking up the world. After 80 days under siege, trucks carrying aid have entered Gaza following several days of delays at the Karim Shalom crossing, the single route Israel has approved for distribution. Faced with mounting pressure abroad, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged last week to implement a new aid system in the enclave. But as details of that plan have emerged, they have done more to raise alarms than to relieve them.
מתחילת המלחמה אמרנו שכדי להשלים את הניצחון, להכריע את החמאס ולשחרר את כל חטופינו, שתי משימות שמשולבות זו בזו, יש תנאי אחד הכרחי. אסור לנו להגיע למצב של רעב, גם מבחינה עניינית, גם מבחינה מדינית. פשוט לא יתמכו בנו, לא נוכל להשלים את משימת הניצחון. יש לנו מלחימה עצומה, עצימה ועצומה, ויש התקרבות. אנחנו הולכים להשתלט על כל שטחי הרצועה. זה מה שאנחנו הולכים לעשות. ודבר נוסף, אני פשוט מצדיע למילואימניקים, אני מצדיע ללוחמים שלנו בסדיר, הם עושים שם עבודה נהדרת, כולל הבוקר, אני לא יכול להיכנס לכל הפרטים, אנחנו לא מוותרים. אבל כדי לעשות את זה, צריך לעשות את זה באופן כזה שלא יעצרו אותנו.
Here are three things we learned there. One, under Netanyahu's plan, access to aid distributions would be fully controlled by the Israeli military. Two, anyone Israel considers Hamas-affiliated will get nothing, and given the minimal amount of aid being allowed in, and the fact that Israel has repeatedly targeted medics, journalists, and civilians by claiming, without evidence, that they are Hamas-affiliated, there is cause to believe many civilians could be denied here. And three, the distribution will be done in partnership with a private charity known as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This was founded in February and is backed by the US and Israeli governments. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, head of the religious Zionism party, took personal credit for the plan on Monday.
בחודשים האחרונים הובלתי דרישה בלתי מתפשרת לשינוי של 180 מעלות באופן חלוקת הסיוע ההומניטרי, כך שהוא לא יגיע לחמאס ולא ישמש כסיוע לוגיסטי לאויב בשעת מלחמה. מינימום נדרש שיגיע לאוכלוסייה, פשוט כדי שהעולם לא יעצור אותנו ויאשים אותנו בפשעי מלחמה. אין מי שזעק את זה בכתב ובעל פה, בתוך הקבינט ומחוצה לו, יותר ממני, ואתם יודעים את זה. וברוך השם הצלחתי.
Here, Smotrich says the government's goal is to allow the minimum amount of aid required so the world does not stop us and accuse us of war crimes.
האוכלוסייה תגיע לדרום הרצועה, ומשם בעזרת השם למדינות שלישיות. במסגרת תוכנית הנשיא טראמפ, זה שינוי של מהלך ההיסטוריה, לא פחות.
And here, the finance minister describes a strategy of using aid to pull Gaza's population to the southern border from where they can be removed from the strip altogether. Now, if true, this could amount to ethnic cleansing, and Smotrich says it will be done in the framework of President Trump's plan. But Israel's plan to create a handful of aid hubs exclusively in the south of the Strip, catering to a fraction of overall need, was swiftly condemned by the international groups who manage global aid at the moment, groups like the UN, who have firmly refused to comply. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder is joining us now to explain the UN and other groups' objections and update us on the current aid situation in Gaza. James, welcome to MEELive.
Hi there.
This week, the UN released one of its most urgent warnings yet about the imminent starvation in Gaza, saying 14,000 babies were at immediate risk. For the past weeks, trucks of aid have been barred from entering Gaza while children just across the border go hungry. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, this is largely unprecedented. Look, we've had situations, there's no doubt, where you get either a famine or famine-like conditions, but normally they're in very, very remote areas. They're very difficult to get to. They're often out of the world's attention. You need to do airdrops. It's a very inefficient way of getting aid. The difference here, of course, is that there is literally enough food to feed 1 million people for 4 months just on the other side of the border. As all your viewers know, Gaza is very, very close to where many people are living very well. So no, this is unprecedented because it's been a blockade. 20 months of indiscriminate attacks, killing an insane number of people, 15, 16,000 girls and boys. And then after a ceasefire showed what could be done in terms of improving the malnutrition status, letting people go home, even though home was putting a tent up over rubble, getting hostages home. This is a ceasefire. And then 11 weeks of a blockade. We've seen malnutrition rates double. We've seen again hospitals run perilously low on medical supplies. We see families, 9 out of 10 families have to choose with water. Do they drink it or do they use it to wash? This is the result. We've got to a point where those in Gaza should never have been to, but the level of desperation or of depression is now at all-time highs on the back of this 11 weeks of an aid blockade.
Why then will the UN not comply with or reject Israel's plan to allow in small amounts of aid?
So a couple of reasons. The most simple reason is, of course, that the UN has a modality to bring in aid. This is what the United Nations does, whether it's Sudan or Afghanistan or Ukraine, Yemen. This is what the United Nations has been doing with very brave partners, very brave Palestinian national groups on the ground. This is what we've been doing since World War II. And as we saw during the ceasefire, around 500 trucks a day. So there's no need for a separate form of aid. There's no need to privatize it. And as you rightly said, the aim of that is to drag people, use it as bait, drag them from the north down to the south. So that's dangerous. It's a militarized zone. The whole point of humanitarian aid is you go to where the need is. That's because it's right in principle, but it's also right in practice. You have the elderly, you have the sick, you have an incredible number of injured people. So you cannot, in principle or practice, push people to the south and then even then have a handful of distribution points. During that ceasefire, the United Nations and our Palestinian partners on the ground were using about 400 different points to deliver aid. This private entity is looking at literally half a dozen, so half a dozen versus 400. At the same time, humanitarian aid isn't just about getting into the arms of a mum or of a grandfather. It's about supplying bakeries. It's about supplying hospitals. It's about rebuilding nutritional system, rebuilding water systems is a big thing UNICEF does. So there's so much more to humanitarian aid than this entity is offering. And as I say, beyond anything else, the umbrella to this is the United Nations and those brave partners on the ground have proved they can do what works if they're given the chance, if they're allowed to bring in the amount of aid that is required and to be able to do it safely. There are more United Nations colleagues have been killed in Gaza than in any other war since the advent of the United Nations.
Perhaps you can help us make sense of the situation today then, because some 90 aid trucks did enter Gaza today for the first time in 11 weeks. Does that mean Israel has temporarily agreed to resume international aid? Or does it mean that the UN is partially complying with Israel's new aid plan? Just help us make sense of this.
No, the aid plan that you refer to, that the private sector is not up and running, and it's very clear from the highest levels of the UN that they won't cooperate with it. They can't. It is, humanitarian principles should stand for something, but of course in Gaza we've seen, international norms and principles absolutely devastated in the same way we've seen agriculture, the economy, hospitals, the lives of girls and boys devastated. Practically, it just doesn't work. So what's happening now is that the United Nations is being allowed to take in aid because of that severe international pressure, but not the amount we need. Now, look, of course, we welcome every truck, we welcome every pallet. When you're someone like me who talks every day to those on the ground in Gaza and hears from mothers who haven't eaten for 2 days because they give their food to their children, or you speak to a grandparent who buys a portion of a fruit, of course, any part of aid, anything is important, but we cannot pretend that this trickle is a solution to the man-made catastrophe. So we can't let this be tokenistic. We can't let this be a smokescreen. If this is a real intent to stop a famine in the Gaza Strip, to make sure doctors have the medical supplies they need, to make sure disease doesn't spread, then we need hundreds of trucks a day. That needs a full facilitation from the Israeli authorities. It needs multiple routes across the Gaza Strip, not just the current one that we have now. And we insist that it means we can get to the south, to Rafah, to Khan Yunis, to Jabalia in the north, not just to a few pockets on the Gaza Strip. We have to be able to reach everyone.
Now, the US private charity that is supposedly going to start delivering Israel's aid plan from May is backed by the US and by Israel. Is there anything that you can tell us about it? What do we know about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? are they obliged to follow, international procedure, standardized international law when it comes to the delivery of aid? What do we know about them?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it would be a complete aberration for all the reasons I say. So we don't know a lot more than we read, and that their aims are a handful of distribution points, and again, forcing people to move from the north to the south. The capacity isn't there. The distribution points are not there. There's no discussion about medicines, anesthetics. There's a huge number of women who are giving preterm birth in Gaza. Those babies need incubators. UNICEF's got dozens of incubators on the other side of the border. So what we know is that they seem to be a private sector, not a charity, a private sector organization designed to support the forced displacement of people from the north to the south against every single humanitarian principle, and utterly unworkable.
And final question, Netanyahu has justified his aid proposal as necessary to prevent looting by Hamas. How real is the threat of looting to aid groups in Gaza, and how central is Hamas to that problem?
Well, the UN's been very, very clear on the problem of looting, and that's when you break a society, when you remove all sense of law and order, when you then restrict, block, completely deny anything that a person requires to survive for 11 weeks, and then allow a single route, only give one road in, there will be looting. The United Nations has spoken about that. That's why we need so much more aid and so many more routes. There was no looting during the ceasefire when we flooded the Gaza Strip with aid. So that's a very, very clear point to make. When it comes to aid diversion, it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. It has been for a long time. For an organisation like UNICEF, as I say, we are last mile delivery, vaccine into the arm of a child, nutritional food into the mouth of that child. The proof is simply not there. And if you want to see the truth, as we've said for a long time, allow international journalists on the ground to stand side by side, the very brave Palestinian journalists, and show the reality to global audiences.
James Elder, thank you for joining us.